Hey, Eddie here with Guitar Mastery Method, and I'm fired up because today we're going to be talking about a subject near and dear to my heart, guitar pedals. Now, the world of guitar pedals and guitar tone has always been an endless source of fascination and inspiration for me. And on the other side of the coin, it's a subject that can be overwhelming and even intimidating for some guitar players. And as someone who has wasted a lot of time and a lot of money over the years making impulse decisions on something that I really didn't understand, I did end up learning a lot of important lessons along the way. And just keep in mind, this is not a sponsored video. All the pedals that I'm going to show you are not the exact pedals I'm going to suggest that you buy. We're going to be talking mostly about the type of pedals, the different sort of food groups of pedals that are out there, and how they can apply to your sound. And a final thing just before we get started, be sure to stick around to the very end of the video because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're going to love. So I have in front of me right here one of my personal boards. This is a board I use live quite a bit. It's got all the bare necessities and then some. And I'm going to walk you through each pedal one at a time, starting with this one right here. This is the tuner. I would say the tuner is the most important pedal that you can have, particularly if you're using a board to play live. The reason being is when you bypass the pedal, it mutes your signal and it allows you to tune by accepting the most unfiltered signal directly from your guitar. So if you're the type of person that uses, let's say, the clip-on tuners, for example, those are great for when you're playing at home. They're perfect for that, actually. You're not necessarily worried about ambient noise because those things can pick up outside noise. Now, if you're on stage, there's a lot more outside noise going on. So you'd have to have everyone on stage be perfectly quiet if you want to be able to accurately tune your guitar using a clip-on tuner. So that's why it's important to have a pedal tuner so that, again, you're getting this unbridled signal directly from your guitar to the tuner, and it can give you the most accurate reading on how in tune your strings are. And next up in the chain, I have this Bogner Harlow right here. Now, this is a compressor / boost pedal. I use it as a compressor. Mainly, if you don't know, compression is one of those effects that you have to really want it, right, for it to even make sense in your rig. Now, what it essentially does to your signal is it evens out all of the peaks and valleys of the frequencies and kind of makes all of the transients of the notes kind of more even. Personally, though, what I like about a compressor is that it just kind of lightly boosts your input signal. So here's my bypass signal with no pedals on. And if I throw on this compressor, it's a very subtle change, particularly how I have it set. I like my compressors to be a little transparent, on the transparent side, kind of more in line with what a studio rack-mounted compressor would do. Whereas you can dial compressors, especially if it's like, let's say, an MXR Dynacomp or something, that can get really squashy, which is a cool sound. I definitely think that sound has a place, just not necessarily for what I do. So I like a compressor to just be very subtle. So you almost can't hear it, right? But it is there. It's just a slight boost to the input signal. And generally, this is a pedal that I like to keep on all the time, just so, you know, it applies to whatever situation I'm going into musically with any of the other pedals, because it stacks very, very well. And then next up, we have my drive section, these two pedals right here. So usually, just to recap a little bit, you know, the order of effects in your chain, you know, you'd want to start with your tuner, of course. If you have a filter effect, like let's say a wah pedal or something like that, wah pedals generally can go between the tuner and the compressor if you use the compressor. I don't have a wah pedal on this board, but that's where I would put it. I just think the filter sweep just sounds better to me when it's before the compressor than after. But, you know, it could be a thing that you try and you end up liking because you prefer the filter sweep when it's after the compressor. So all of this is subject to change based on your personal taste. You know, this is, again, just based on the industry standard, sort of what most guitar players agree on, what the most effective order of the effects are. So with the drive section, so these are going to be the overdrives and distortions and that like. So right here, this is the XTS Winford drive. It's essentially a Proco Rat, a version of a modded Proco Rat. And I tend to use it for the more high gain sound. So when I click this on here, I'll turn the compressor off. When I click this on, I get this nice juicy overdrive. Now when I have the compressor on, it just, like I said, it boosts that input signal, so when I stack it with the drive, it just makes it a little bit juicier, which I like. Now with overdrives, if you're the type of person that likes to have multiple overdrives, which I certainly am, I like to have different flavors of overdrives on any given board, and I like to be able to stack them, so have multiple overdrives on at the same time and make sure that they play well together. Generally, I like to put the higher gain pedals first, and then kind of move in that sort of order. So like high gain, then to the lower gain or medium gain, and then solo boost. So that brings me to this next pedal right here. This is the Ceriatone Horsebreaker. So it's essentially an overdrive and a boost. So on this side, I have the overdrive, which is just a nice, crunchy kind of Marshall Bluesbreaker type sound. So just like a nice, subtle, just added oomph, right? I'm not trying to get too wild with the overdrives, especially because I like to stack them. So if I were to stack both the Winford drive and the Bluesbreaker side of the Horsebreaker, so that right there, like that's all the gain I could possibly need, especially if I'm playing a guitar with humbuckers, you know? So something like that works great for me. This is not necessarily something you know, for like a high gain metal type situation, but if that were the case, you know, all I would really do is just crank the gain on one or two of these pedals, and I would just want to make sure that it's still staying tight, right? Because too much gain can be a bad thing. It's just, it starts to get real flubby and sometimes even fizzy, and you get a lot of this added compression that just kind of gets your sound lost in a mix, you know, especially when it comes to playing live. And because this is a live board, I have this dialed in specifically so that I make sure my guitar is heard at all times. So moving on right here, this is the solo boost. So generally, if you want a boost pedal to actually bring up volume and, you know, not as much add gain, but add volume, which is what you want if you're trying to play a solo, you want to be able to cut through the mix and you want to be heard. So generally, a good volume boost and a nice EQ boost is what you want, more so than a gain boost, because I got plenty of gain with these two guys here, right? So with this is based on a Klon circuit, so which is a type of boost I really like. Now check this out. If I have the Horsebreaker or the Bluesbreaker side on, and then I throw the Klon on, see, that gives me a real big boost in volume. It's louder, right? Because it's coming after the overdrive. Gives me all that nice sustain. So that works perfectly. That's gonna cut through a mix and it's gonna sound huge and authoritative, and I love that, you know? So generally, like I said, if you wanna have a boost pedal on your board, and again, this mostly applies if you're gonna be using this live, having that added boost in the volume is gonna really help you cut through, and you generally want your boost pedals to be at the end of your overdrive chain in order to achieve that. Now I want to mention again, these aren't pedals that I'm suggesting you need to buy. Just think about the type of pedals that they are and consider the order that they're in and what they do, right? So everything that I tell you, if it applies to you, right? If it applies to the sound that you want, or if it's something that, let's say, a guitar hero of yours tends to use, then that's going to be more in line with what you should probably invest in if you're looking to get more pedals. But trust me on this one, speaking as someone who has made a lot of mistakes and a lot of impulse decisions where I would just buy stuff because I just wanted it. I couldn't give you any better reason than that. And I would end up spending all this money on stuff that I really didn't need to get the sound that I wanted. There were even times where I already had the sound I wanted, but I would buy more stuff thinking that it would somehow get me, I don't know, maybe more of that sound, but it really didn't. It was just, I had the sound that I needed and I really didn't need to go any further than that. So really, you know, only consider spending money on something that really applies to you and what you want for your own guitar tone. All right, so now moving on from the drive section, we have, I'm going to keep the blues breaker side of the horse breaker and the compressor on. This is kind of like a sort of like always on general kind of overdrive tone I like to have, especially when I'm going to be running these subsequent effects here. So now we're going to go into the modulation effects, right? So modulation I tend to put after the overdrive section, which is again a reflection of the sort of industry standard. So starting with this Sugar Baby here, this is a Mojo Hand Effects Sugar Baby. This is a tremolo pedal. So if you don't know, tremolo does this to your signal. It oscillates the volume, so you get this really, moody tremolo effect. So it's a really inspiring sound. If I were to turn it off, it's not the same, It really does a lot. It's subtle, but it really does a lot to the sound. And the cool thing too about the tremolo effect is it kind of does vibrato for you. You wouldn't have to vibrato a note. You can just let the tremolo pedal do it. And of course you can set how fast you want the oscillations to happen, how intense you want them to be. You can dial up a tremolo to get really choppy, So if I wanted to increase the depth, let's say, and the rate just for fun, let's see what that sounds like. Oh, cool. That's very cool, I like that. So it actually slows down when I bring it clockwise, and then counterclockwise speeds up. I tend to prefer the depth a little low. I don't need it to be too choppy, just like the proper kind of throb, Something like that. So that's a cool effect. I have that effect on almost every single board I have, which is about 6. So more than one man should have. Yeah, tremolo effect is one of my favorite modulation effects. Like I said, it's a very inspiring sound, which brings me to a very important point. The gear that you have, any piece of gear, whether it's your guitar or pedals or amps, whatever, you got to be so happy with how they sound that it inspires you to play, right? That's the most important thing. Gear is not meant to be a substitute for sounding good, really, because that all starts in your hands. But it should inspire you to want to play. It should inspire you to want to come up with stuff, And then moving on to the next modulation effect here, we have chorus. That's my power supply, which is pretty bulky, so I mount that on top. But yeah, the chorus effect, which is basically, I always like to call it the 80s in a box, Turn that drive off, get something a little cleaner here. And I generally like to dial it so that it's subtle, right? I don't need it to be too 80s sounding, but you can definitely hear it when it's off, or you can hear, you know it's not there when I turn it off. And this Boss chorus, the CE2W, the Waza Craft, it's one of my favorite chorus pedals, and it's relatively inexpensive, Chorus is one of those effects where I want one, maybe 2 types of chorus sounds, depending on the situation. So, and chorus is one of those effects that I'm not super snobby about how good it sounds. I mean, chorus is hard to mess up. I mean, I've played chorus pedals that were like $40, just really, really inexpensive. And they did the trick, for my taste. I'm not, like I said, I'm not much of a chorus snob. I like chorus to do one thing, and it's pretty much this. So that being said, if you don't know exactly how you want your effects to sound, you don't necessarily need to be forking over the cash to get something that's just way more than what you need, right? So keep that in mind. That's why a lot of these effects processors, like if you're new to guitar effects and stuff. Those big effects processors are useful, to just get to learn, learn how they work. Kind of like a beginner's toolkit for effects. And of course, if you were to play those amps now that have all these onboard effects, they're, like the Spark or the Boss Katana, something like that, you got all that stuff on board and it works. It works great. And it's not just something for people who play at home. I've seen people in downtown Nashville using Boss Katanas live and they sound great. So, if it works for you, it works. So moving on, we have phaser, which is another favorite effect of mine with modulation. I like it. It's just a really funky kind of sound, Again, subtle, but it just adds that really cool kind of thing. And if you wanted to, if we wanted to maybe invoke some Eddie Van Halen, the phaser is great for that. It just does a really cool thing, whether you're playing kind of cleanish or if you're using a lot of overdrive. It's a great effect. I love phaser. And as far as if you're wondering the order within the order, right? So if it's like we're now at the modulation effects section of the pedal board, so does the tremolo need to be before the chorus and before the phaser? Personally, I don't think it really makes a difference. As long as the modulation effects are all kept in one spot after the overdrive section and before what we're going to get into next, which are the time-based effects. So that would be your delays and your reverbs. So starting with this one, this is a delay. This is one of my favorite small delay pedals. It's in a small enclosure, but it can do a whole heck of a lot. It's the Walrus Audio ARP87. I had this pedal for years, always loved it. I tend to use it for what's called the dotted eighth delay, which is this sort of repeated delay that when you're playing something like, let me just show you. So when I have it turned on, and by the way, this right here is what's called a tap tempo. So you can tap it at the tempo that you want to set the repeats to. And let's see how I have it set. So you can hear it when I stop playing. So it's one of those effects. Generally with my delays, I try not to let the repeats kind of happen to the point where they're stepping on what I'm playing. It kind of does that here because when I'm using a dotted eighth note, I like to have a higher mix with the delay. But check this out. If I'm doing something like... So it's just a very ambient and just very pretty sounding delay. And when I'm doing that dotted eighth note stuff, it just kind of adds that really cool, like sort of stuttery delay. Whereas with it off, if I were to play that same thing. So you can clearly hear, what it's doing to, the sound, and it's a pretty sound. I like it. So I prefer to have multiple delays on a board. And so this next pedal right here, the Earthquaker Devices Dispatch Master, is great because it is both delay and reverb, and you can even dial them independently. So if I wanted it to be just a delay pedal, it could be, or if I wanted it to be just a reverb pedal, it could be. But I like to have it as both. But you might be wondering, what's the other type of delay I like to use? So the dotted eighth note delay that we just went over, I would call that a high mix dotted eighth delay. And what that means is I brought in the volume of the repeats enough to where you hear them a lot sooner and they're a lot louder. Whereas the delay that I like to have on usually all the time is what's called a low mix delay or a long tail delay, where it's just something that you only really hear when you stop playing. So I have this on right now. I'll turn on a little bit of overdrive. If I were to play something, even kind of solo-y, you can barely hear it, but it's there, You know, just barely there. You can hear it when I stop playing. And then on top of that, there's some reverb. So the reverb is just this nice little backsplash. Generally with your time-based effects, you want to have your delays first and then your reverbs at the very end. So essentially, at the very end of your chain, if you're not using a looper, by the way, which I would say the loop pedal would be at the very, very end of your chain, because that way all of the effects you have in front of it can feed into the loop pedal, which is what you want, right? But that's not something I use live, and it's not something that's on this board. So if you're not using a looper pedal, then the reverb pedal would want to be the last in your chain. And you want to think about it this way. You want the effects to hit the reverb, but if the reverb is hitting any of the other effects, what that can possibly do is kind of distort the reverb, and it doesn't make it as clear. I like a reverb to just be very subtle and just out of the way, but it's something that you know is there and it feels good. But when you turn it off, you're like, wow, I need that back. You know, so if I were to just go back to just playing, normal, I no longer have that big ambient sound anymore. So I turn that back on. Now I have that just tasty little backsplash, So that being said, an effect like that I like to have on all the time because it's subtle, it works, it adds to the sort of drama of what I'm playing. So if I stop playing, then there's that nice little repeat with that reverberated backsplash. So I can use any of the subsequent effects going into it and it'll work, So let's say if I wanted to do something, say just something really, tremolo-y, just like, nice big chords. Something like that, just adds to this nice sound that if I were to turn everything off, do that same kind of thing. Just kind of sounds boring and a little lifeless, to be honest, so you have those on. And that could be why, they're called effects, because they not only affect your sound, but they affect the performance of your sound, right? Everything that you're hearing, it just, like I said, kind of adds this drama to it, which I love. So that right there covers, the bare essentials as far as having, the tuner, most important, right? Compression, which I could take or leave, if I'm being perfectly honest, but it's one of those effects that I know enough about what it does that I know I'm gonna need it sometimes. So it's subtle enough to where if you're not necessarily someone who needs compression, who needs to, adjust or squash your signal to adjust the peaks and valleys, of your dynamics, if that means nothing to you, what I just said, then you don't need a compressor. I wouldn't recommend spending money on something you don't need, right? Then you have your overdrives, which you can have one overdrive. If there's one that you love and that's your thing, then by all means stick with that. Or if you're like someone like me who likes different flavors of overdrive and kind of getting different vibes, I like to have multiple overdrives. In this case, there's two technically, and they give me all the gain that I could need. And I like to have the higher gain pedals first, and then moving in order of, so if I were to have, let's say 3, a high gain, medium gain, and low gain, they would be in that order. Be high gain first, then medium gain, then low gain. I just think they sound better when you stack them in that order, personally. And then you have the solo boost, right? So if I'm playing live and I want to be heard and I want to be nice and loud and also clear, the solo boost after the overdrives is where you want to have it. Then you got your modulation effects, right? So tremolo here, chorus here, phaser right there, which are there are more modulation effects, of course. These are just the ones that I tend to use the most. And then of course your time-based effects. So like we have this dotted eighth delay, which I use as a dedicated like high mix ambient kind of delay. And then right here I have the dispatch master for that sort of low mix, long tail delay with that nice little backsplash of reverb. And with that, I can do virtually any gig that let's say that falls in line with what I've done historically, right? With a board like this. I could take the compressor off. I could probably even take unless it was really important to a part in the song, I could probably take that delay off. Could probably even take the phaser off. Heck, I could probably do a whole gig with just one overdrive pedal, a tremolo pedal, and then a reverb and delay, you know, if I had to pare down and make it work. So I'm just bringing up that point to basically explain that it's not about the quantity, right? It's not about how many pedals you have on a board. So just by seeing this many pedals on this board doesn't necessarily mean you need all these pedals, because some of these may not even apply to you. And if you happen to know what you can accomplish, right, you can decide like, hey, I could take half this board and I can do the gig that I need to do, which is perfect. That's a perfect first step into deciding what you're actually going to be spending your money on, right? So that right there is my essential beginner's guide to buying guitar pedals. At the end of the day, you want to make sure you get the type of gear that inspires you, makes you want to keep playing and even keep writing. You know, to me, a hallmark of a good piece of gear is if you play it and then something just comes out of you, something creatively, like not just noodles, you know, just like something that, some kind of cool song idea, you know. For me, tremolo is great for that. I tend to play tremolo, you know, I'll put tremolo on, I'll just sit there and then just kind of football some chords, and it's like, man, like I can hear a song coming on, you know. That's what you want. You want a piece of gear to inspire you. That's the most important thing, and that alone would make it worth the price of admission. So now that we've gone over this crash course on buying guitar pedals, why don't we talk about something to help improve your guitar playing? Which brings me to that free gift I was telling you about. Got it right here. The Fretboard Conveyor Belt. This is a system that I've designed that has helped thousands and thousands of guitar players learn how to quickly, confidently, and comfortably navigate the fretboard on your guitar, which will give you more than enough material when you're practicing those new pedals you get. So be sure to click here to claim your free copy or check the link in the description box. And with all that said, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm Eddie with Guitar Mastery Method, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.